complicated. 2 steps forward and 3 steps back.
We are back, episode 3. Hey all, it's Tony Volpicello, and thanks for joining. This is the Pick Up Where We Left Off episode, Interviews Part 2. So sit back, invest 20 minutes in yourself, and welcome back to the Career Jigsaw Podcast. So in today's episode, we'll focus a bit more on the hiring manager and how to improve your interview success. Because let's face it, the interview process, if done well, should help you select the best candidate for the role. And I would argue if done really well, the decision on who to hire becomes a no-brainer. So one point off the bat I want to bring up. Just because you have 5 candidates for a role doesn't mean you have to pick one. Your challenge might be getting a better candidate slate. So the advice here is pretty simple. Don't settle. However, I will make the argument that once you master the interview techniques I'm sharing, you will start to attract more candidates that want to work for you. So I want to go back to a point I made in episode 2. Managers, your interview style has way too much variability. In many cases, there's a real lack of preparation. Questions are off the cuff. Resumes aren't reviewed prior and used to shape the interview. And ultimately, you hire who you like more than who's ready for the role. 25 years ago, that was me. And my hiring track record showed it. Half the people I hired didn't work out. Why? Because I kept hiring people I got along with in the interview. People who were likable. People who gave me answers I wanted to hear based on my closed-ended questions. And then things changed. I was exposed to a new way of interviewing, the behavioral interview. And overnight, my questions changed. Suddenly, I reviewed the resume with a more critical eye. Now I was prepared in advance for every interview with a tailor-made list of questions for every candidate. I started to find I was getting more data in every interview that helped me make a better hiring decision. I was able to assess experience. I was able to really assess readiness. And I was even able to assess communication skills. And with my eyes more wide open, I was also able to take a step back and look at other intangibles in the hiring decision. Did some of the candidates engage me prior to the interview, which to me shows initiative and passion? And did some candidates engage me after the interview with a follow-up note? And just like that, my hiring success dramatically improved. Not only did my employee retention results improve, but so did my performance. I was hiring better employees. And here's the ultimate benefit. My employees were being promoted faster and more often than employees on other teams. So I hope you can sense the passion in my voice because it's real. I cannot stress enough how this is a game changer. So if I haven't already piqued your interest, then here's another benefit for you to think about. Take a look back at one of your recent hiring mistakes. How much time did you spend, or are you spending now, on trying to fix that mistake? Are you spending a disproportionate amount of time on this employee versus others on your team? I would argue you should be spending more time with your better people. So that's my commercial for your attention to today's episode. If you want a better way, here it comes. Okay, listener, if you aren't a hiring manager, you might be thinking this episode isn't for me. Perhaps think about it like this. You are getting the answers to the test. This is like being in the other team's locker room. This is inside baseball, so please don't skip this episode. So let's frame today's episode a bit around the quote of the day. Hiring the right people takes time, the right questions, and a healthy dose of curiosity. That comes to us today from Sir Richard Branson. So now it's time to review some feedback from our experts. We polled our expert team on the types of interview questions they ask the most and their favorite go-to interview question. So here are the results. 79% of our experts love behavioral interview questions and ask them the most by far. These questions are the ones asked to draw out past experiences. And then their favorite go-to question, well, of course, everyone had a slightly different question they might ask as their favorite, but there was one very common theme. All were looking for ways for the candidate to differentiate themselves. So these were the why you questions, the share some success with me questions. So again, for my candidates out there, are you spending enough time preparing to answer these types of questions as we reviewed in episode 2? And for my managers out there, are you prioritizing behavioral questions as part of your pre-work? So this next section is the most important part of today's podcast. It's time to review the 7 critical components of your interview agenda and assessment process. I cannot stress enough that if you implement these 7 key steps into your interview process, you will dramatically re-engineer the way you make hiring decisions. Key number 1, depending on how much time you've allotted, what are the 5 to 10 questions you want to ask to assess overall fit? Put these questions in order of importance in case time becomes a factor, and we'll discuss what types of questions these are in a moment. Key number 2, what is your icebreaker question? We all have that question we use to open up an interview, like tell me about yourself. But make sure you phrase it in a way that encourages the candidate to keep it simple so they don't take up too much time early in the interview. Key number 3, if you're interviewing jointly with another manager, what's your plan to rotate questions? Syncing up here between the two of you can ensure the right questions still get asked. Key number 4, what's your plan for assessing pre- and post-interview candidate initiative? So for instance, did the candidate do homework prior to coming in today? And did the candidate follow up with you after the interview? Key number 5, do you plan to ask the candidate what questions they have for you? Why is this important? Well, it can give you great insight into exactly what's on the candidate's mind and how it fits into your goals for the job. So really think about, what did these questions tell you? Did the candidate seem genuinely interested in the company and the role? Or were there red flags? And what could these red flags sound like?
How much sick time comes with this job?
Or,
will anyone monitor my internet usage?
So these examples might seem a bit exaggerated, but again, they'll give you great insight into exactly what's important to the candidate. Key number 6, what other parts of the interview, both positive or negative, can you assess? For instance, attire, promptness, communication style, communication clarity. And then key number 7, does your checklist also include an overall assessment of the resume? Was it professional? Was it customized? Consideration if referred by somebody else. So if this was somebody that you trust and they referred this candidate to you, have you considered that in your process? And lastly also, if this candidate is internal, they work for the same company you do, have you had a chance to look at their performance history and also any recommendations from others? I could make a very strong case for creating a scoring system for the 7 key steps we just outlined and assigning a score to each candidate. This could move your hiring decision to a much more objective one versus the subjective decision you might be making today. Now, let me be clear. This doesn't mean ignore your gut. This simply means stop relying on it so much. Okay, now let's dive a bit deeper into the types of interview questions you could ask. And for the record, none of these questions should be closed-ended yes or no type questions. So to me, there are 5 types of questions that could be asked in every interview. Behavioral questions, which explore past experiences, situational questions, which pose hypothetical scenarios, technical questions designed to evaluate a candidate's knowledge and expertise, competency-based questions, which assess the skills and abilities required for the job. And then there's traditional general questions that cover background, motivation, etc. First off, be aware of your go-to questions. You all have them. These are the questions you tend to ask in every interview. What I would ask you is, do they serve you well or they're just making you comfortable? Are you asking them out of habit? So put your brand aside and commit to a customized interview agenda. Unless, of course, your go-to question fits into the agenda process. Your approach should be to flex between these types of questions, but not evenly. Some of this, of course, depends on the type of job you're hiring for. I would argue the first 2, behavioral and situational, have the most power. This is where you can get beyond the words on the resume and draw out whether or not someone really has the experience to do the job. So if you were a hiring manager for a team today, and you can only ask one of the 2 following questions, which one would you pick? Number 1, tell me what your top 2 or 3 strengths are. Or number 2, tell me about a time you took over a new team and turned around their performance. So I would argue strongly that number 2 is less about the right words and more about drawing out real experience, especially if the role you're hiring for requires a team to improve their performance. Or if the role you're hiring for is customer facing. Which question has more power? Number 1, how are your customer service skills? Or number 2, tell me about a time you had to help a customer meet their needs. If they don't have an answer for number 2, probably means they don't have the experience in doing it. Or what if the role you're hiring for requires this new employee integrate really well into their new team? Which question would help you better assess this? Number 1, do you feel you're a good teammate? Or number 2, tell me about a time you joined a new team and give me an example of how you helped that team bring their whole experience to a new level. Now let's think about some success we see on a resume. Success you want replicated in this new role. You could do one of 2 things. You could acknowledge it, but not take a deep dive, or you could ask, I see you've had great performance over the last 2 years. How did you do it? And here's where you're looking for specificity. You are looking for a repeatable process, not a one-hit wonder. Hey, one quick tip. Just because you get one answer to a question or one example does not mean you cannot ask the question again for more examples or answers. Depth is key. The candidate may be well prepared for one answer, but 2 to 3 answers is where you really find out how much experience they have. This could simply sound like, that's a great example. Can you give me another? Again, this is where creating your customized interview agenda can be a home run. So now let's think about something specific you might need in a new teammate. For example, what if you want to reinforce an environment of, if you see something, say something because of past issues on a team? This is another great opportunity to assess this by asking the right question. This could sound like, tell me about a time you thought you were being pressured to compromise your ethics and tell me how you handled it. Now you have to be prepared to possibly not get an answer to this question, which isn't a bad thing. For some, they might have been lucky enough to never experience this. That's okay. Asking the question alone shows the candidate how important ethics are to you in the workplace. And if you do get an answer, you can either like what you heard or again reinforce, if you see something, say something as your culture. It's a dicey subject, yes, but in some cases, a powerful topic to tackle. Imagine if Enron or Madoff Investments asked this question. So there's a topic I've seen somewhat ignored in interviews today, but clearly has a place in our world, which is comfort and experience with technology. This can be a challenge, but if you know the role you're hiring for requires a certain level of proficiency with technology, glossing over the topic can be a mistake. And I'm not talking about Silicon Valley level experience here, but we all know almost every job out there today requires a certain comfort level with computers, technology, and software. And this isn't an old versus young argument. I'm 58 years old and addicted to technology, whether it be my smart home, which I self-installed, my self-driving car, or my love for all things Apple. And I've seen plenty of people half my age unable to adapt. Posting to Instagram does not make you tech savvy. So if you have concerns about the learning curve for the job you're hiring for, figure out the right question or questions to ask to assess their overall proficiency. This could sound like, can you share with me a time you had to learn a new computer system and walk me through how that went? Or, how do you stay updated with emerging technology? Or, can you walk me through your experience with different software tools and platforms relevant to this role? And oh, by the way, I got those above questions I just shared with you through AI. Not bad for a retired 58-year-old. Hey, are you still with me? Don't switch to some music. Put the phone down and listen up. Okay, that's better. Why? Because I want to share with you a game changer in developing both my bench and my reputation as being someone others wanted to work for. It is a true power play, and here it is. When possible, give on-the-spot feedback at the end of the interview to the candidate directly. And my policy was for internals only, so those that worked for the company I did is where I employed this policy. It was hugely powerful and very well received. It became an immediate investment in the employee. And it's very simple too. You wrap up the interview with, here are 2 or 3 things I thought you did really well, and 2 or 3 things I thought could have been better. Whether the candidate gets the job or not, they hear the feedback from you, not someone else. I cannot tell you the power in this play and how it helped me hire better associates, helped me develop a better brand, and helped me develop a better bench. So I just wanted to share that. Please feel free to use it. It's a game changer. You know, there are times when you look at your candidate slate and you wonder, wow, I'm not sure I'm going to find the person that I need based on what I see in front of me. That's one scenario. But then there's the kind of opposite scenario, which is, wow, I've got a great slate of candidates, and I'm not sure how the heck I'm going to separate them. They all come with great qualifications. Resumes look strong. They're internals. They've been recommended to me. So now you need the interview to help you separate. So I want you to think about, what questions can you ask to help you do this? Well, honestly, of course, everything we talked about above is one way to do that. But then asking the question, the direct question to the candidate, is key. What separates you from other candidates? And here's where you'll look for specificity, not fluff. You want examples. This is the why should we pick you question. Hopefully they'll nail it. That should help well for a slate of strong internal candidates. But now I want you to think about how you scrutinize an external candidate and how well you really scrutinize the resume. Have you sat back and counted how many jobs they've had and over what period of time? Okay, I get it. Job hopping is more common now than it was when I started in the workforce. But if you're a candidate that's had 5 employers in the last 10 years, what makes you want to be their 6th? At least ask the question. Why should I hire you? I've seen you bounced around quite a bit. You've had 5 different employers over the first 10 years of your career. What makes me want to be your 6th employer? I think it's very fair game to ask the question directly. So by now, light bulbs should be going off around this customized interview approach. The agenda should be different for every candidate, but within a fair and consistent framework. And here's the beauty in this. Once you get really comfortable with this customized approach, you'll begin to draw from experience the questions you want to ask. So here's another example. What if the job you're hiring for requires hitting deadlines and you want to make sure you really dig deep under the hood to make sure this associate can handle deadlines? You'll immediately think of the question, can you tell me about a time you missed a deadline and how you handled it? See how easy that is? Once you truly understand what you want to know, the type of question you want to ask and how to ask it becomes second nature. There's so much power here. The trick is to better understand what the demands and or skills of the job are, and then customize your questions around that. So I want you to think about your question agenda this way. There's 3 kind of key sections to think about. First, what questions, strengths or red flags, did the resume prompt? Second, what are the top 3 skills this job requires? And what questions can I ask to assess if my candidate has these skills? And not only has the skills, but excels in using them. And then third, are there team integration or culture fit goals I have that I need to assess with this candidate? What questions will help me do this? These 3 areas alone will help you complete the interview agenda.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, it's time to close this puppy out by recapping the top 3 takeaways from today. Takeaway number 1. Create an interview question agenda that is very focused on what you learned from the resume and what the required job skills are. Your interviews are no longer a one-size-fits-all. And make sure there's a heavy dose of tell me how or tell me about a time. Takeaway number 2, implement a new policy of giving on-the-spot feedback at the end of the interview to all internal candidates. The company owes it to them, and you will be building a following. And then takeaway number 3, round out your hiring decision process by assessing what homework was completed, what intangibles happened like promptness, communication skills, etc., as well as interview follow-up. And lastly, our Invest in You recommendation this week is a very simple, straightforward one. Enroll in a class in behavioral interviewing. It will be a very worthwhile investment. The summary of today's episode is available on our website at thecareerjigsaw.com. You can also find information there on a free resume review or in joining our mentor network. Well, podcast people, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for listening in today. If you like what you heard, keep listening, follow us, etc. You know the drill. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, and more to come next week. Be safe, all.